Good evening. Thank you for spending some time with us on this gorgeous Sunday evening, even though it's very warm out. This is the Senate District 46 Town Hall, and we're going to do a quick little wrap-up of what happened during the end of session, but mostly it's here for you guys to ask us questions. So I will start out. This was an second year of an unprecedented session at the Minnesota House, since we were tied 67-67. Gave us the opportunity, though, to work closely together. It is the second year of the biennium. So last year we set the 2-year state budget. So this year you usually work on a bonding bill, and if there's a little bit of a supplemental budget, which we really didn't have that much money to spend. So we didn't end up with targets for any of our committees, but we were told whatever you can work out with your co-chair, we'll see what we can do. But the big highlight of this session was getting a bonding bill across the finish line. You might remember we did one last year, which was a little bit smaller, and we did a net that was in the 900 million range, and this year it was 1.2 billion, which really went to a lot of infrastructure around the state, mostly water and roads. I'm very excited to say finally, it only took 3 years to get the bonding bill for St. Louis Park, so just south of Highway 7 on Louisiana and Oxford, right between Highway 7 and the hospital, that part that always, in the springtime, if there's a lot of rain, it floods a little bit, all that stuff washes into the creek. There's not really good connectivity with sidewalks there. So that is now that project has some state money to go along with the federal money and the city money. And Representative Kraft and I carried that in the House, and Senator Latz carried that in the Senate. For those of you in Hopkins, we also got a TIF extension for a project off of Blake Road, just north of Excelsior Boulevard. So I kind of went into session with low expectations, and we got lucky. We actually did two of the things that I think we needed to do the most, which was pass a bonding bill and stabilize HCMC, our safety net hospital that serves the whole state. We did both of those, which is super helpful. We'll still have some more work to do. Personally, as the education finance chair, my co-chair wasn't that really interested in doing a bill. So we heard a lot of stuff, but we didn't really pass much out of committee. But toward the end of session, I was able to work with him on a bill for anonymous threat reporting systems for our school districts. So it's a mandated requirement that they have one within the next 2 to 3 years, and we have some grant money. And that's just a way for students, parents, teachers, if they see, it's kind of like a see something, say something. And Edina has one right now, and it's been working great. It helps a lot to connect students to services they need, especially around mental health. So we got that across the finish line, the forecast adjustments for education bill and a few little other ones. And then the one thing I want to make sure I say before I turn it over, we also passed we also put on the ballot a constitutional amendment you'll see this fall that will allow us to double the money the public school, permanent school trust fund lands produce. So when the state was formed, there is land set aside to help fund education. Some states have sold theirs off. Ours, we keep in trust, and some of the land is in mining, some of it's in forestry. So whatever is collected from those industries goes into a pot of money for our schools. When the land trust was created, it was only going to spend whatever there was interest. But now we have all these other tools like bonds and capital gains. So the constitutional amendment allows this land trust to distribute more money. So instead of 2.5%, it's going to be 4.5% if it passes. So we'll double the money our districts are getting, and with that, it'll be about 1% on the state formula every year. So this is super helpful. All the school districts across the state get it, as well as a little pot of money we have for our tribal schools. So look for that on your ballot. If you have any questions afterwards, I can answer them. But with that, I think I'll pass it on because I want to give us some time to answer questions.
Good evening. I'm Ron Latz. I'm your state senator. Just by quick way of background, I serve on the Judiciary Public Safety Committee, where I'm chair, and I serve on the Commerce Committee in the State Senate. I spent 9 years here on the City Council in St. Louis Park and 2 years in the House before I went to the State Senate. I'm a lawyer in town. I've got a private practice, so small business operation. My wife's a lawyer. We've got 3 children, almost all of whom are out of the house now, so almost an empty nester. And very pleased and proud to represent this community, St. Louis Park, Hopkins, and part of Edina in the State Senate. This is the end of a 2-year term for the House and the 4-year term for the Senate, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity not only to look at what we just accomplished, but to do a little bit of a recap what we've been able to accomplish since the 2023 when the Senate term began. So I think we can look back with a great deal of pride at how we have advanced the cause of our state. We passed paid family and medical leave. We passed earned sick and safe time. We passed driver's licenses for all. We passed the Reproductive Options Act, also known as the PRO Act, the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act. We banned conversion therapy. We mandated 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. We legalized adult-use cannabis for recreational use and expungement of records relating to cannabis convictions. We passed Restore the Vote, which allowed felons, after they leave prison, to immediately be able to vote again in the communities where they are working and paying taxes. We passed $3 billion in new tax benefits for Minnesotans, including eliminating the Social Security taxes for 75% of Minnesota seniors. We passed universal school meals. We passed the largest investment in housing in state history. We passed $300 million in public safety aid to cities, counties, and townships, of which Edina received $2.3 million, Hopkins $828,000, and St. Louis Park $2.2 million. We passed, in the area of reducing gun violence, the extreme risk protection orders, or red flag laws. That's one I had worked on for 5 years. I was a chief author in the Senate. We expanded background checks for firearms. I was also the chief author of that in the Senate. Worked on that for 20 years since I'd started in the House. Took a long time to get that across the road, but there's some value to being able to stick with it for the long term. We passed a lot of bonding dollars. Cheryl's already mentioned some of them, but just in the 23-24 calendar cycle, we passed $1 million for Edina for a tactical training building at the South Metro Public Safety Training Facility, so they'd have year-round training space. And we passed $1.3 million for a community health and safety center, also for the city of Edina. This year, we did get the long-running effort to fund our St. Louis Park, Oxford, and Louisiana project, $5.1 million in the bonding bill for that. We also advanced the Hopkins project for the cold storage site. Their TIF authorization was about to expire, and we were able to extend both the 5- and 6-year rules so they can continue to work through the financing necessary to redevelop that space. There'll be hundreds of affordable and senior housing units, townhomes, and commercial spaces. And we were able to pass a special liquor license to allow food halls in St. Louis Park's West End. That one almost made it through last year, got stalled in the House because of one chairperson who wanted to allow underage servers throughout the state, and he blocked everything else. But this year, I had put together last year a proposal of just the one-off, smaller local provisions, which became the framework for passage this year. So there weren't any controversial statewide changes, but we got a lot of the one-offs done, including the one for St. Louis Park. In the area of gun violence prevention this past spring, we did in the Senate, by a vote of 34 to 33, pass a comprehensive gun violence prevention package, the most comprehensive package ever passed in the Minnesota Senate. Result of my partnership with Senator Zainab Mohammed from South Minneapolis, who, by the way, represented many of the families that were affected by the Annunciation shooting. It included working on a bipartisan gun violence prevention group, and included in that package was an assault weapons ban, a high-capacity magazine limit, restrictions on 3D printed firearm files, or sometimes called ghost guns, binary trigger ban reinstatement, improvements to the red flag law, violence prevention funding directly, a statewide violence prevention research center, and expanding gun-free school zones, as well as investments in mental health for adults and for students, especially students, and school safety funding, expanded funding for school safety officers at the Department of Public Safety that could teach local school districts how to be more safe. Unfortunately, with the divided House, that didn't get a vote in the House. I was the chief author of a package to hold ICE accountable for the constitutional abuses in Minnesota, especially in the metro area, and we saw a lot of that here in St. Louis Park and Hopkins as well. It was a package of 11 bills that included protections for schools, hospitals, child care centers, and courthouses. We deemed them to be essential spaces where the federal government would not be allowed to use administrative warrants to arrest or enforce immigration laws in those locations. We mandated access to crime scenes and investigative authority for the Minnesota BCA whenever there was a shooting, including by federal agents. We established a right to sue federal agents when they violate the civil rights of Minnesotans. We required identification for federal agents as well. We banned masks, except in very limited circumstances for federal agents when enforcing other immigration laws. And we mandated that law enforcement officers, including federal agents, render aid when they harm someone, and also that they not block others from rendering aid, as we saw with the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. They were alive, or at least Renee Good was alive for maybe 15 minutes after she was shot, and the federal agents denied physicians who were on scene and emergency responders from even going in and checking to see if she had a pulse. So we passed that bill, and unfortunately, again, in the House with its equal division, did not take that up. The Judiciary and Public Safety budget, which I also chief authored as chair of the committee, included supplemental funding for the courts, victim services. We backfilled the federal cuts of $12 million, put a full $12 million of state money to make sure crime victims would not face any cutbacks from the victim services organizations. We fully funded the request from the Philando Castile Memorial Training Fund, so our law enforcement officers are better trained. They can learn de-escalation training, how to respond to circumstances, how to deal with mental health situations. So better trained law enforcement means we are all safer and all better served. We took a good step in emergency communications infrastructure, setting up a task force to look at the statewide armor system for communications across the state. We passed additional firefighter protections when they die from cancer and other on-the-job related causes to make sure that they get their families, surviving families, get financial support. We passed firearm tracing improvements. We also passed a safety and security package to protect security for judges, including the Chief Justice, for legislators, and the public that attend the Capitol, go to the Capitol. We now have to go through screening. Everyone who goes into the Capitol has to go through screening. So we got new procedures for emergencies. We've bulked up the physical building security. So especially when visitors and school groups come in, everyone's at risk if there's any threat to public safety in the Capitol. So everyone should be safer. We advanced a cause of affordability by passing $125 million in property tax relief, and we passed $254 million in one-time car tab fee reductions. We also made major investments in housing. We've already talked a bit about the bonding bill. In housing in particular, we put $100 million into creating and maintaining affordable rental housing across the state. We put $40 million toward family homelessness prevention and emergency rental assistance to help people before they lose their housing. In particular, in response to Operation Metro Surge, Senator Port, who chairs our housing committee, carried that bill, came through the Judiciary Committee. I was a strong supporter and co-author on the bill. In the Judiciary Committee, we added a provision for a delayed eviction date for the 4 months that assistance program is in effect, from 14 days to 30 days, so that the organizations that get the funding that can help the tenants pay their landlords for their back rent will have time to get that to the landlords before their eviction notices take effect. So very proud of having extended that protection to our renters that have been at risk from Operation Metro Surge and otherwise. As Cheryl mentioned, we did pass some stabilization for HCMC. You know, HCMC trains 70% of the doctors in Minnesota. And they are the emergency Tier 1 backup hospital and primary hospital for major emergencies for the entire state. So we put $205 million into HCMC to stabilize them, and we created a $500 million backup stabilization fund through 2031, while the hospital has a chance to look at its entire financial structure and come up with a long-term solution. And then, I think very importantly, we tackled fraud. I'm as angry as everyone is or ought to be about the fraud that's occurred in Minnesota. It's taxpayer dollars, it's your dollars that were being misused, misappropriated. And so I was a co-author and very active in shaping the terms of the Independent Office of Inspector General that became law this year, which will be stood up to strengthen fraud prevention and oversight across all state programs, not embedded in the individual agencies. And we passed a Medical Assistance Protection Act and invested in human services information technology modernization. So that will improve detection and oversight, strengthen coordination across agencies, and streamline program management. So surprisingly to some, but we came into a session, I think correctly, with low expectations about what we might be able to accomplish because of the close division between the majority and the minority parties, or in the House, co-equal parties with numbers, and an election year on top of everything else. I think we got an awful lot accomplished. Part of that's a testament to the willingness to work across the aisle to find the common ground where we can advance the cause for the betterment of all of Minnesota. And part of it, that is simply the fruit of relationships that we've been able to develop over the years to pass stuff that's needed to be passed. Again, to the benefit of Minnesota, and most importantly, from my standpoint, for the benefit of St. Louis Park, Hopkins, and Edina. So when we get to the point, I'd love to hear everything that you have to say, comments, feedback, questions, whatever you'd like to share with us.
I texted Larry. When I start out, I always forget to introduce myself. I'm just a little shy. I'm Representative Cheryl Joachim. I represent all of Hopkins, the southern two precincts in St. Louis Park, and about a quarter of Edina. I co-chair the Education Finance Committee. I am also on the Tax Committee and the Ways and Means Committee that sees all the bills before they get to the floor. And I can't say enough about being able to stabilize HCMC. I found a fun fact because I got to hear it in Ways and Means and in taxes. It is the only 24/7 hyperbaric chamber in the Midwest and definitely in Minnesota. And you say hyperbaric chamber, we don't live by an ocean. But that is also used to treat carbon monoxide poisoning. And they have an incredible research program at HCMC where it also treats burns and type 2 diabetes. So it is, and it's also a 2-room hyperbaric chamber, which is very rare in the Midwest. So it was, that was just one of the things that they do that really is a statewide asset, which while we put general fund money into it, we really need to look long-term in a way we can figure out how to have that cost of that be spread across the state, because 40% of the people that are treated there are outside the Hennepin County area. And then also the IT modernization. I'm glad Senator Latz mentioned that. This is the systems in all of our counties that do intake for like Medicaid, child CCAP, like all the different federal funding that we funnel through. And they were using systems that were literally on the black screen with the orange letters. Like Maxis is so old, and like 3 different areas they'd have to hand input items over again, and that's where the error rate happens. The systems don't talk to each other. So now it'll take a few years, but hopefully this will not only help speed up the process so that we also keep those employees, because they have like a 50% attrition rate. Sometimes people don't last more than a month because it's a very frustrating job. But also that will help maybe catch fraud on the front end, because we won't be hand inputting things and systems will be able to talk to each other. And then there's one thing I did forget. Session this year started out a lot really different for the members of the House. We lost our speaker in June, And it was tough to be in the chamber without her that first day and through the rest of session. The front desk staff, Pat Murphy, who's incredible, the guy that you always see at the front in front of the speaker, and then during COVID had to call all of our names every time we voted. He has kept a memorial on Melissa's desk with flowers since last June 14th, and we kept her desk by itself with her picture and the flowers on it. But one of the things that we did pass that was really important to us was increased penalties for impersonating a police officer, as well as something that Colin and Sophie Hortman asked us to help that took them almost 9 months to get back into the parents' house because of all the chemical irritants and everything that was shot into the house weren't cataloged, and frequently they aren't cataloged. So the folks that had to come in and do the mitigation, it took longer than it's expected, and the insurance wasn't covering it. So we passed some provisions that would, Sophie and Colin really didn't want that to happen to anybody else. They had a pro bono lawyer in former U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar who was helping them out. They had the governor's office helping them out, and it still took 9 months, and they didn't want anybody else to have to go through that. So we looked at how we could change some statutes. So at least if those irritants or anything that is used in a course of an action like that, the homeowner would get the copy of the list of it so that a remediation company would know what to do with it. So with that, thank you for letting me introduce myself. And I'm going to toss it over to Representative Kraft.
All right, good evening, everyone. So Larry Kraft, I represent most of St. Louis Park, the parts that Cheryl doesn't have. Been in office for a couple of terms. I serve on the Energy Committee. I'm the vice chair. I serve on transportation and state government. For me, this session was three things all at the same time. It was emotional, it was successful, and it was deeply unsatisfying. The emotional perspective, as Cheryl mentioned, it was really difficult, and the emotion came out at random times during session of not having Melissa around. Today was actually Melissa's birthday, so a little bit of that. It was successful for the reasons that we said. Like, we needed, for me, the thing we had to get done of anything was saving HCMC, and so we were able to do that. And so I think that's really important. The bonding bill is fantastic. We had to also, the federal government sort of has a gun to our head with their HR, is it HR1? HR1, the big, beautiful bill, and we had to do some things around conformity with Medicaid stuff, so we did that. The fraud measures, property tax relief, and we passed a bunch of Hortman memorials, so that I think was all things that were successful. For me, the really unsatisfying part of it was, the committees I sat on, two of them were really just dysfunctional, and one was semi-functional and very contentious, but that we didn't make progress, that we couldn't even get a vote on the House floor for the excellent gun violence prevention package that Senator Latz and Senator Mohammed put together was horrible. And to have Speaker Dameth go back on her word to the Annunciation parents. I did participate in the sit-in. We had a 40-hour sit-in. I was there for all but 3 of them, where I went home to shower and have dinner with my wife and kid. So that, deeply unsatisfying. The fact that we couldn't get a vote on the ICE package also. I will also say, and I'll extend it to these 2 years, I got involved with politics to do something about climate change. We were able to prevent rollbacks of the policies that we were successful in 23 and 24, but we really didn't move the ball forward. And that we just cannot do. It is unacceptable for us to do that. We couldn't, there was a bill I carried on plug-in solar, which I'm really excited about and got close, but there was some Republican opposition, I think unfounded opposition around the safety side of things, which there's a standard now that resolves that, but we couldn't get that done. I even had a bill on thermal energy networks to allow those to be bonded for, and that didn't even get done. So we got done very little this year on that, and this gives me more energy for the, let's say, other side of this job. Healthcare, our healthcare system, HCMC is great what we did, but HCMC is the first domino in a long line of them. Our system is broken and failing, And we need to realize that, and we need to make some really systemic changes in how we do healthcare and how we pay for healthcare. And I don't, we weren't able to make any progress on that. So with that, we've talked a lot about what we did. I think I'm going to open it up for questions. You can come up here to have questions. If you prefer to write down a question, if you raise your hand, this is Caleb Rohr, my legislative assistant. He'll bring you around a piece of paper and a pen, and you can write it down if you'd prefer to do it that way. So with that, let's open it up for any questions.
Harder than it used to be. Hi, my name's Steve Anderson. A friend of mine worked for Oracle for 26 years, and he was one of the 30,000 people that got the 3 or 4 line email one morning that said your services are no longer needed. And he called his boss and said, "Is this a spam?" And she said, I was told not to take your phone call, but we've been together 26 years. No, it wasn't a spam. Your job no longer exists." And she hung up. And that is just an example of what's been created by our shareholder capitalism. On a side note, I want to thank you for this being able to take classes at the University of any state school for free. I take advantage of that and love it. And a couple of the classes I took, I learned from an economist called Angus Deaton that wrote a very famous book about how wonderful capitalism is. But he and his wife, who's also an economist, vacationed in Montana. And they went up there and everybody was talking about the suicides. And so they did a study, and these Nobel Prize winning economists found that if all you have is a high school education, your life expectancy is 8.5 years less than somebody with a college degree or better. And if you don't have a high school education, your life expectancy is 14 years less than somebody with a college education or better. We have an economy that is killing people. And this example with Oracle is just an example of what's going on. And so my question is, what can the state legislature do about creating stakeholder capitalism where everybody's interests are addressed and not just the owners? Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in with the education piece for sure. And I can't wait to audit some constitutional law classes. That's what I'm looking forward to. But with what we passed in 23-24 allows any student to go to one of our state colleges if their family makes under $80,000 a year. That's something that we were able to hold on to, even though there was a much huger uptick than we expected. But we're also trying to figure out with the new economy how to bring back the trades and more of the CTE classes, the career tech ed classes back into our high schools too, so that students get started earlier. There's a CNA program at Hopkins right now, and they can take all the classes, and the minute they turn 18, they can get certified. So it's trying to figure out what that future economy looks like and make sure our kids are ready for it. But then also the other end of it, like you said, making sure that we are supporting our employees that are in that economy. That's one of the reasons why we work so hard to pass paid family and medical leave and earn sick and save time, so that folks can take care of themselves or others if they're sick without in fear of losing their job. But there's a lot we need to do in the rest of the economy, and we don't have like 3 hours, but I would love to talk about it. But that's some of the things that we did in 23-24 that we're able to keep. And I don't remember the percentage right now on the uptick in the free college that we got to, but Larry might remember, but I don't. We have surpassed what we estimated folks being able to take it.
Yeah, it's been really fantastic to see it turned around enrollment declines in many of our state schools. The North Star Promise, I think, is what it's called. It's been very successful. Sometimes folks say, well, it's too successful, it's costing a bit much, but I think those kinds of things, investments in young people and their education, are the kind of things that, from a societal perspective, pay back in spades. I'll add a few thoughts for you. Certainly there's some limitations at the state level that we have relative to the federal level. There needs to be some significant changes federally, I think. But a few ideas is, tax structure, right? We maybe more of a federal issue, but the amount of taxes that the wealthiest and the very wealthy pay compared to what others pay, they're not paying their fair share. And so I think that's one. And if you look at, I'll tell you another one, healthcare, right? Our healthcare, we insist sometimes in this country on market stuff, like for healthcare and childcare, when they don't work as markets. Healthcare, we spend $6,000 more per person per year on healthcare than other developed countries. And the big difference is other developed countries do single-payer universal healthcare. That's $2 trillion a year more that we spend. This year, the teachers came up lobbying us to change the way that their health insurance works, because what's happening is that the increase in their premiums, right, and their copays and stuff are getting worse, but the increase in their premiums are net dollars more than the dollar increase in their salaries. And so what's happening now with our broken healthcare system is it's just starting to eat more and more of everyone's compensation. So I think we have to address that from a root cause issue. And this insistence that it's the private market, it just, I'm sorry, when you go to a emergency room and you're sick and you need something, you're not thinking about how much it costs. The other area that's a market failure is childcare, right? Childcare is a situation where the people that work in it don't make enough, and the people that need it can't afford it. So this is another area that we need to, to take some of those tax dollars and invest in these areas. And these things will return to society huge net benefits. So those are some of the things, structural things that I think we need to do. Some of that requires federal level, but we could do single-payer healthcare in Minnesota. We could do more childcare. We could even, New Mexico got to universal childcare. So there's priority decisions and difficult decisions we can make, but these are some of the things. I think those are the ways we need to be thinking to structurally think differently.
Boy, Steve, you asked a big question there. And I guess I've got the benefit of having listened to my colleagues and thinking about the question. I agree that we need to invest in our K-12 system better and make sure the outcomes are top-notch there. And we need to improve our VOTEC training, especially around computer technology, how to deal with AI. From a fluency standpoint for IT workers, as those who are just doing coding aren't going to survive this revolution. I would add we've passed in the last several years some mandated financial literacy classes in the K-12 system, and it's really important for people to be able to graduate from high school understanding how to balance a checkbook and how to invest, how to start saving, those kind of things, so that when they get to the point of losing their job mid-career or something, maybe they got a little stronger financial footing to be able to weather through that storm. The high schools now have a robust PSEO where they can go to the colleges, University of Minnesota, for example, and while they're in high school, and they get high school credit for their college classes, and they get college credit as well when they move it on, graduate from high school, and there's a similar program, College in the Schools, where they're taking the classes in the high school, but it's college-level classes that are being taught by college professors or level. I think we should redouble our investment in early childhood investments as well, pre-K. I mean, I served on the Community Education Advisory Council here in St. Louis Park before I got into the legislature, before I got onto the city council. And so we were the community group that oversaw early childhood and family education. And so that helps families learn how to be better parents, helps the kids get an early start on learning. Because if they aren't reading at grade level by fourth grade, their likelihood of graduating from high school is much, much lower with the consequences you talked about. I think we ought to focus a bit more on mid-career training, and I think that the North Star Promise has facilitated a lot of that, where people can go back to college. If a family earns less than $80,000 a year, they can get that free college tuition. On the healthcare side, I strongly support universal coverage for healthcare, and if we were talking about this 40 or 50 years ago, I think we'd be in a better position to say that we can we can move to a single-payer type system. But we have such an embedded infrastructure now. I think it'd be completely disruptive and expensive to try to change the system over now. But there are ways with public options and others, and adequate funding from the state to make sure we've got universal coverage for everyone. Because the real question, I think, is do you have insurance when you go there? My hesitation also extends to the questions about whether or not our medical innovation systems would survive that kind of a changeover, and whether if you put in a single-payer system, a single decision maker about what kind of services are going to be covered or not covered also creates an issue. And you can go a lot of directions with what services could be covered or not covered, but ideology can get involved in determining what kinds of services are going to be provided or paid for in a single-payer healthcare system. This probably could teach a whole course. I couldn't. Someone could teach a whole course on stakeholder capitalism and how it compares to.
They are at you.
I'm sure. That's probably where your question came from. But anyway, we've touched on it a little bit.
The one thing I would add as input is I've been very encouraged by James Tallarico in Texas, and that he's talking about the battle now is not between the left and the right, it's between the rich and the poor. Yeah. And the poor are losing. Yeah. And so his goal is to make sure everybody's got a decent job, a roof over their head, food to eat, and a little money to take a vacation. If those were our political aims, and we can talk about the details of how that works, but job, food, roof over your head, little money for vacation, that would be so much better than worrying about all the other crap. We don't need another ballroom.
Well, certainly not $1 billion cost overrun either. I mean, I would agree with you. I think some of those major changes have to be done at the federal level, so that they're uniform across states.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, really, on that Tallarico quote, it's almost becoming the very wealthy, the wealthy versus even the middle class, right? I mean, the problem is it's getting harder. I mean, when in Minnesota, the median income won't buy a median priced house in any metro area in Minnesota. I mean, it's a serious structural issue.
Yeah. My wife and I just celebrated our 53rd wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
I was at Topgolf talking to one of the 20-year-olds, and I said, I don't think anybody in your generation is going to be celebrating a 50th wedding anniversary. Oh, no, nobody.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah. Okay, my name is Nancy Gibson, and I live over on Glenhurst Avenue in St. Louis Park. You are my representative. And for those of you who have not spent many weeks and years at the Capitol, I want to tell you we have some of the best representatives in our state. You are so accessible. I totally appreciate that. And you, Senator Latz, tenacious. You work so hard trying to get this gun bill and make Minnesota a safer place, and I just really, really applaud you. So, I wouldn't be up here if I didn't want to talk about natural resources. That is my background and my strong passion. And for climate, we often forget about natural resources being a great tool to fight climate change. But we have another issue under attack, and that is the copper mining coming into northern Minnesota by a foreign company that is going to sell the copper to China. I know the feds have totally failed us, and now it's sitting on your laps to try to make a change, to try to stop the copper mining up in the Boundary Waters. We've had a pretty good stab at trying to stop polymet, but this is going to be a tough haul, and I would like for you to enlighten me if you think this would be an issue that is doable at the Capitol. And do you think that the three of you would help make it happen? Thank you.
So it wasn't doable this session, but it certainly can be. I believe it is doable. What House File 309, which is Senate File 875, is a ban on this type of mining in the boundary waters or its watershed. And technically, it's actually you can't permit it there. So if we were to pass this, it would supersede what the feds have done. So the issue, we had a long discussion on this with the lead author is Representative Alex Falconer, who's an expert in this area. What we just need to make sure doesn't happen is that they don't issue the permits between now and when we can actually take action. If they do, there's some other things we can think about doing. So we're starting to think through that. It's likely that they won't. I think there's things that can be done to slow it down and things like that. But if we could pass House File 309, then it would supersede what the feds have done. I am a co-author on that bill, and absolutely we'll be bringing that up next session. And with the right legislature composition, then we could pass it. And I see a path to do that.
And a lot of us in the House, I think there's some senators too that signed on to a letter to Governor Walz because there's things he can do with executive orders right now that he's not. So.
And Representative Joachim, you're a co-author on this bill too.
Yeah, and I would agree. I for a long time, I had a certain amount of confidence in the permitting system to go through the environmental reviews, and I've just reached the conclusion now that the risk is too great to even go anywhere in allowing copper sulfide mining in the watershed that feeds into the boundary waters. It's like the largest natural watershed area undisturbed in North America, I've canoed there, I've mountain biked up there, and it's just wonderful. And all it takes is one accident, and you'll destroy the entire ecosystem because the water will just flow where it flows, right? It'll contaminate all the lakes, and it'll go into the Quetico in Canada as well. So I'm just, rather than creating some mechanisms that say, well, we're going to toughen up little standards here, toughen up standards here, I think let's just be honest about it. The risk to me is too great. I would just ban it outright.
I would just add that I hope all of you keep in mind that Antofagasta has a perfectly awful record. And they would say anything, but what they do is despicable, really, what they've done in South America.
Yeah.
You don't want to know, it's awful.
Yeah, for folks that might be watching, there was from the crowd a comment, make sure we don't forget about Antofagasta, which is the Chilean mine conglomerate that is the one behind trying to do that. And they have a very poor record of pollution and, a poor record on worker rights and all kinds of other things. So absolutely.
The proliferation of cameras in public spaces and permissibility of recording and surveillance devices in public areas, sidewalks, roads, and many other places feels really bad. There have been studies that say that people don't do well if we feel like we're being constantly watched. It's bad for our self-esteem, and there's even a theory that it's bad for our birth rates. Additionally, placement of public cameras, shot spotters, ALPR systems, these kinds of things often drive policing. It's been found that there's a correlation not of incidents happening and therefore ALPR systems get put in a place, but that an ALPR system may give law enforcement information and then the police show up to the place where the camera is when the actual incident may have happened somewhere else or the vehicle was en route. And so you wind up with an over-policed area based on where these surveillance devices are. Additionally, sorry, I have to check my notes. Right, yeah. This is asymmetrically shaping law enforcement, and there are some laws around which devices need to be registered, how disclosure works, and it seems like they're not being followed very well. And as somebody who lives here, I'm not exactly sure how or where to report an unregistered ALPR camera that I see recording public areas. It makes me kind of uncomfortable. I don't know who's watching them, and I don't know how safe I am. I don't know who maintains it, and I don't know what happens if there's a security breach. This makes me feel unsafe. Can we do something about this? Are there things that are in place? Can you tell me, from your perspective, if this is an issue and kind of what's the temperature here?
I guess I'll take a stab at it first, because when ALPRs, or the automated license plate reader devices, were first proposed, they came through the Public Safety Committee in the Senate, and I was involved in fashioning the data practices portions around that to try to make sure that the data should be public is public, that the data that protects the privacy of the individuals whose vehicles are identified on the ALPRs doesn't get disclosed inappropriately. And so how long you hang on to the data, there are all sorts of, because there's a lot of data that's gathered. But it's also a useful law enforcement tool when they're trying to solve crimes and they've got some idea of where something occurred, but they don't have any visual witnesses that can give them a license plate number of a vehicle that was involved in commission of an alleged offense and is taken off. That's helpful for solving crimes too, and that was a big pushback from law enforcement. They want to hang on to the data for a long, long time. We pushed back and said, well, you don't really need it that long. We got to balance civil liberties here too, not just hanging on to data forever. We've seen a lot of abuses, and I think especially with Operation Metro Surge, and somehow the federal government getting access to the flock cameras. Flock is it's a brand. It's the name of the manufacturer of what are generically called the ALPRs, or the automated license plate readers. What the federal government was doing was getting a hold of that data through Flock and then linking it into all sorts of other data systems, like names of registered owners of the vehicles, and addresses, and all sorts of other information about those individuals, cross-checking it against all sorts of other databases. So they create literally a data profile of the people that they thought might be violating the immigration laws. So we haven't quite figured out yet, but I think we need to figure out how it is that they accessed all of that and how it is that they got a hold of what should otherwise be not public data to be able to do that. So that's one of the things I would like to do next year, is to hold some hearings to try to figure some of that out, because we do have restrictions in state law about who has access to that information. But somehow that information has gotten out there. And so I think we need to figure that out. You've raised a really, really important question for privacy, as well as other reasons that you've identified. So thank you for bringing it up.
And that is what was like one of the most frustrating things in the House when we talked about all our different bills to hold ICE accountable for what they were doing. We always kept getting back with like, well, that didn't really happen. Or if they just would have paid, if you just would have followed the law, or if you just would have complied, we wouldn't have had all these problems. And there seemed to be no real concern over data privacy, over keeping our schools, our hospitals, our places of worship safe. So that was extremely frustrating. I know we had a bill to look into the flock cameras, but nothing went very far in the House with the Tide House. I know Representative Kraft had something to add.
A few things. One, in terms of your question of where to report something like that, I would start at the Attorney General's office, right? That's where I would start to try to report. And if that doesn't work, you should contact your representative and we can work to figure out, where to go with that. We did pass, one of our colleagues, Representative Steve Elkins, worked for years on data privacy. He's a data privacy expert, and we passed a really good data privacy law. And I don't remember if it was in 24 or 25 that we passed it. Anyway, when I got a bunch of emails from folks about some of these data privacy concerns, what he said is we actually are covered in this stuff, in that the law that we have says that anything less than plus or minus the length of a football field, including the end zones, cannot be sold without advance permission from a citizen. The Attorney General's data privacy team was already going after the data brokers who were buying this data and selling it to ICE. So if you have a situation like that where you think your data is being sold or something like that, that is not legal today, and you should contact the Attorney General's office.
What kinds of consequences are outlined for a violation of that?
I don't know, but can find out. Maybe we'll note that question.
Some of this, because it's public data, it's covered by Chapter 13 of the Data Practices Act, and there are actually criminal penalties in there, and there's civil liability available also if it's your data whose use is violated under Chapter 13. It's a really complex labyrinth of definitions of different types of data. It depends if it's personal data, individual data, or data on individuals, or if it's data on corporations, for example, they're treated differently. But there are some tools there, but frankly, they're not very accessible. Where you really see them is when you've got things like every now and then you'll see about a law enforcement officer is accessing driver's license information when it's not related to an investigation. We've seen a couple of those instances in the last, 5 years. I think there was one female police officer. Some of the male officers in her agency were accessing it just to learn more about her and view her picture and stuff like that. And she sued under the Data Practices Act to get recovery. So there are some tools available, but it's not easy for most people to access.
The lawyer here may be a good one to follow up on what the penalties are.
Well, I do chair the committee, so we could certainly take a look at increased penalties or finding ways to make them more accessible to people. Yeah, and I can call a hearing at any time, to look at this stuff. So we keep our majority next year, and I keep the chairmanship, and we can look into it.
Yes.
Marilyn Levy Baumgarten from St. Louis Park, just like a 5-minute walk from here. This is really conjecture, calls for conjecture on your part. I feel like I've been watching TV. But do you think if that Gun Violence Prevention Act had gone for a vote in the House, that it could have passed?
That's a hard one to tell because, so I'll use the example, Representative Green had worked with some students on a bill to provide safe storage on school grounds. We have a lot of kiddos that are doing Minnesota State High School League, trap and skeet. They're students, they know how to keep their guns safe, but the adults coming onto campus somehow thought that was too much of a burden. And she had a promise from one of our Republican colleagues that they would vote it out of committee, and then they changed their mind. So I know people have been having a lot of conversations with a handful of legislators across the aisle that I think maybe if it would have come for a vote, we could have at least, so the votes we were trying to take was to just get it calendared,
Right.
that it could be worked on and maybe pass. But it was really hard to try to figure that out because sometimes they'll say, yes, we'll do it. And then like my co-chair all session didn't want to do anything. And at the very end, we worked on anonymous threat reporting. But I know that the Annunciation parents had worked very hard on contacting a lot of legislators. They were up there almost every day for weeks. And we had a lot of discussions around what that looks like to keep not only our students safe in schools, but in places of worship, in a movie theater, in a grocery store, like everywhere else in our community where gun violence happens. If anybody is aware, it's a really good organization to watch. It's the Gun Violence Prevention Research Center that's at Hamline University. One of the first hearings, second hearing we had in education finances, we had them come in. They've been doing over a decade of research on mass shootings across the country, which means more than 4 people shot or killed. And that also happened to encompass any school shootings. And with their research that they've done over time, I remember having them come in when I was education policy chair about 6 years ago. And the statistics have just grown exponentially. But when it comes to just when you talk about schools and school shooters, almost 80% of them are current or former students. So they've been through all the drills. They know how to get in. The Annunciation shooter had gone to that school. They knew where those students would be that first day of class. So we have to look beyond just the locked doors and hardening our schools, because that doesn't always help if the shooter's already in the school or knows how to get around it. 90% of them tell somebody ahead of time. That's why the anonymous threat reporting systems are so important. 80% of them show signs of depression or mental health, or there's signals that are there. So having those wraparound comprehensive services for our students. In 23, we passed money for more student counselors, social workers, psychologists, and nurses in our schools, more trusted adults in those classrooms. So those different layers of approaches, but it all came down to the guns. 50% of students get their guns from a family member, or they steal them. When Representative Green was talking about guns in cars in just school parking lots, there's a gun stolen out of a car every 3 minutes in this country. So it really is about the guns too. And that was what was so hard, and why that comprehensive package needed to kind of hang together. And I'm very happy we got the anonymous threat reporting system through. In our health bill, we had more money for schooling, mental health, and crisis management teams. But we really needed to pass some more gun, common sense gun prevention bills, one of which Representative Tapke worked really hard on in the House was the high capacity magazines. That buys people time. 2.5 minutes. 20 kids were shot, 2 were killed in 2.5 minutes through leaded glass and stone. Nothing should do that. And I think going back to would somebody have voted for it? I'm not sure, but it would have been nice to give it a try.
Just to add on to it, and go ahead in a second, but I was just thinking, it's the legislature, it's going to be political, but we've got someone who's running for governor, and then, there's the convention this weekend. So in my mind, I'm thinking, after the convention, could there be a special session to take up a bill like that? I mean, do you get that courage afterwards where, okay, that is behind me now, let's at least, I guess if you call a special session, you have to be somewhat sure that something is going to pass, but is that something like that an option?
I don't know if a special session would be would be able to, because it'd be everybody that's already took a pass on that bill already.
I know.
But, and also usually the governor you have to make a deal when you go into special, because the governor can propose it, but then we can stay in as long as we want. But that is a good hope. And I know there's been some amazing articles in the paper, and I can't even fathom the strength some of these parents have had to come up and tell their stories over and over and over again. I don't sit on public safety, but I sat and watched that testimony because my colleagues had to be there and listen to it firsthand. I was going to go back and listen to it. And listening to Jackie Flavin talk about having to cremate their daughter twice, if that doesn't get to you, I don't know what will. So it baffles me that there wouldn't be at least 1 or 2 members, but we can only hope.
So what we committed at the beginning that we were going to use every tool we could think of in the House to pass and to force this issue. And I think we did. We did try to force bringing it to the floor with the procedural motion, waiving the rules. The downside of that gave us a chance to talk about it on the floor, but the downside of that, it requires a 2/3 vote to waive the rules. So it would have required 90 votes.
Right.
I had conversations with several, Republicans, moderate, on this. I think there's an opening in some areas, but, I think that, is it likely that it would have passed if it got a vote? Probably not, but it's not zero, right? I mean, there would have been 10, 20% chance. I mean, and once you get to the floor, you can do amendment. There's lots of things that can happen. I will say they were terrified of this coming to the floor and taking a vote.
Right.
And there was enormous pressure being put on their moderate members. So, what happens if you actually get to a vote? there's a lot of competing forces there. It certainly was worth trying to do it, but
And one of the things we tried to do too was that there's a time frame where after a certain amount of time a bill has been sitting, you can motion for it to come to the floor, and there's a certain date where before that happens where you can just get a simple majority. So we pulled it up on that last day that simple majority could happen. We just needed one. We didn't need 2/3, we needed one, and we couldn't even get that one.
yeah. If I could just say one more point. I mean, I do think, so it's deeply, as I said, unsatisfying, frustrating on gun violence prevention this session. But I mean, you know, Senator Latz told the story of how long he worked on some of these bills, right? And I do think that what we have done this session with the work that they did and with the way we forced the issue and reflected the demands of Minnesotans and those Annunciation parents is I think we have dramatically reduced the time that it will take to get to some of that legislation. So like I do think that this made progress, not as much as we wanted or Minnesotans deserved, but I do think that was an outcome.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Senator Latz, for co-authoring that bill.
Thank you. I'll just pipe on, if I may, to that issue. You know, it's been a long time since I served in the House, and I respect you guys for figuring out how to get the most you can out of what had to have been an incredibly challenging session. But just to give you an idea of the complexity of some of these issues, gun violence in particular, you know, just to assemble 34 votes in the Senate over the years, and especially I'm thinking of the red flag law and the universal background check law, but I had to negotiate with 4 of my Senate members to get the red flag law passed on a 34, because we only had a 1-vote majority in the Senate. So I had to find the language that was going to make 4 of them who were in vulnerable districts or are worried about their ability to vote for it and withstand a reelection challenge. And then, but in addition to them, you've got all the gun violence reduction stakeholder groups, so Moms Demand Action, you got Protect Minnesota, you got Giffords, you got Everytown. So they're involved. You got the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association, the Minnesota County Attorneys Association, the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, some of which they weren't always on the same position, and some of it depended on which provision and which bill they were comfortable with or not comfortable with. You know, the sheriffs are elected officials across the state, so they're answering to elected constituencies at the same time, while the others aren't. And then, so you bring all of them into the mix. You've got all the public health folks that are involved in these negotiations. Then you've got a governor's office that's got some interest in what the language looks like. And then once you can get 34 assembled on that, you got to figure out a way to work with the House that might have some different ideas on exactly what language will work or won't work, what's going to get the votes to pass there. So I worked very closely with Representative Dave Pinto, who is one of the leading advocates in the House for gun violence reduction initiatives. And that's what it took over a course of 5 years just to get the red flag law passed. I mean, Mr. Anderson, you mentioned earlier about suicides in rural communities. Well, the greatest cause of gun violent deaths in Minnesota is suicide, not homicide. And it's mostly middle-aged white males in greater Minnesota in the rural communities. Part of the irony of all of this is that Speaker Demuth is protected by a red flag order because she received some threats from a person that had access to firearms, even though she voted against it when it came up on the House floor and we passed it in 2023. But we will protect everyone. We did fund the Violence Prevention Research Center in the Public Safety Bill, $500,000 to be able to help them continue with their research. They are a nation-leading research center to help reduce gun violence as well. There's a lot here, and part of it is a matter of relationships too. I mean, we were in conference committee in the Public Safety Committee, and one of my Republican cohorts, the Public Safety co-chair from the House, offered to trade changes in the Brady-Giglio law, because he wanted that passed, to get my proposed changes in the red flag law. Because we've been gathering for the last couple of years, since red flag took effect, proposed changes to make it work better, mostly coming through county attorney's offices that are the ones bringing most of the petitions. So I had a package for that. You know, even that was so controversial, just passing that in the House, but he was willing to accept some of those changes if he got something that he wanted. So for some, it's not always about principle. And for some of it's just a matter of having the relationships with people. I know of at least one Republican senator that, under the right circumstances, would have voted for our gun violence prevention package. Basically, he struck a deal within his own caucus that they wouldn't tie up our floor for 5 hours. They'd shut some of their most vocal members up. And then he agreed to vote no on the package. So I would have rather had his vote and gone for 5 hours of debate, but that wasn't our call. But that tells me that there are some that under the right circumstances would be willing to vote for this.
And there are some that aren't serious about their trades. One of the moderate members in the West Metro told Representative Green, "I'll vote for your school gun storage bill if you get rid of universal meals." So, in front of the students that had just presented. So there you go.
I'll tell you, there's a ton of emotions around this. One of the most heart-wrenching committee hearings I've ever conducted. I was telling some folks about this before we started today. It's been a month after the enunciation. We had parents there. Parents of one of the 6 children. Absolutely gut-wrenching. Still with a straight face say, guns are not important.
That's 18 to 25-year-olds. The number one cause of death is guns. And Senator Doran Clark, it was Senator Hochschild on the floor, I believe, that had a very moving story because 2 of his younger cousins were in the Annunciation shooting, and one of his cousins had gotten hit, and he kept apologizing to his mom that he hadn't run fast enough, that he was apologizing that he got shot. So, you know, sometimes you wonder what world we're raising our kids in when they have to apologize to their parents that they got shot.
So I wanted to ask a procedural question, a curiosity question. How much is AI affecting the way the legislature runs? I mean, you're doing research, or is it writing some of our laws? I mean, the other thing I always wonder about is, in the last week of the session, you get bills that are hundreds of pages long that you can't possibly read all the hundreds of pages. You have an AI review that to see if there's any things in there that you didn't know about? So is AI being actively used, or is it being just ignored?
I can start, and then I see a question in the back too, so we should get through this one because you already had a question kind of quickly to make sure we get to hers in the back. I'm going to go at the back side first. You hear this story about all these bills, hundreds of pages and all that, but those bills are really putting together other bills that have already been heard. So this idea that there are these big bills put together that no one has ever read is just false, right? It's false. I mean, we're a part-time legislature, right? You want to fix this issue so we don't have to do so many big omnibus bills, make us a full-time legislature where you don't have time pressures to get things done. That's one thing. So, most of these bills have been heard and people know about them. We have staff, partisan research staff that will summarize stuff for us. And so when a package bill comes together, they'll quick put together the summaries of all the other bills so you can see what's been in them. Are we using AI? I think we're starting to in some of that stuff. I think we're more thinking about how do we regulate AI. Is probably the bigger question. I think right now there's not an organized way of using AI. I think at the legislature, I think individual legislators use it in different ways.
Yeah, we had one legislator that was doing a bill around banning manipulation of video and photos, our now leader Stevenson, and he got up and gave a speech on the floor, and he said at the end, he goes, and AI wrote that for me. That's what computers can do. But no, I think we, like Larry said, all these bills, usually if they're bigger packages, they've gone little bits at a time through. So you see the smaller bills. I'm lucky to sit on Ways and Means because we get to see all the packages as they go through. And I try to go back, especially if there's an individual bill in there that has had a lot of controversy. I'll go back and watch the hearing stops that it made so I can kind of understand, kind of like a lit review to see if there's any other questions that are missing. But very rarely will we get these huge bills. And a lot of them are, so I'm also on the tax committee, and a lot of the times it'll take 2 or 3 years for a individual tax bill to get put into a bigger package. So, and our nonpartisan staff, when they write them, they structure the bigger bills in different chapters. So you just get so used to, like I can look at the tax bill and go, oh, there's a TIF, oh, there's 10 of them that didn't pass last year. So like you get so used to reading it that you can usually digest it pretty fast. But we rely so much on both our nonpartisan staff, which we're so lucky in the state of Minnesota. There's a lot of states that only have partisan research. We have professional, nonpartisan researchers and lawyers that help us put the bills together. And they're incredible. And I don't know how our system could run without them. But then we also have our partisan researchers that help summarize them too.
I mean, I'll just add 2 things really quickly. One is, I completely agree. We've got a professional staff at the legislature, and frankly, that is how the legislature is in a position to gather information, be well enough informed to be a counterweight to the executive branch in our constitutional form of government. Because they've got all the agencies, they got all the staff in the governor's office, they've got all that information, and for many, many years, the legislature didn't have anything more than a steno pool for staff. I mean, the representatives' offices were their desks on the House chamber floor. And they wrote postcards to constituents. That's how they stayed in touch with folks. And that was it. They didn't have any of their own staff. If they needed something written up more formally, they'd take it over to the stenographer pool and have it typed up that way. I did my undergraduate honors research paper in political science on the legislative staff at the Wisconsin State Legislature. And I used the same tool for the congressional staff in the Minnesota delegation in Washington, D.C. when I studied there. I mean, the staff are incredibly valuable and important, and we have so many talented folks that are there. So we rely on that. And we also rely, frankly, on relationships that we have with our other members. I mean, I'm an expert in certain areas. I'm not an expert in others. But I know which of my colleagues I trust on other issues that share my values, the values of this district. And I turn to them if I have questions. So I feel pretty well informed by the time I'm voting on a bill that hasn't come through the committee, although in our committee, in Judiciary and Public Safety, we see 50% of the bills that are introduced in the legislature come through this committee for one reason or another, either primary jurisdiction or because there's a data practices provision or there's a liability provision in it. So we see a lot of the stuff, and even though we don't act, we act on all of it, we focus on the part that's within our jurisdiction. So we develop our relationships with the people that we trust too. I mean, we all have that within the legislature. You know, I got a strong relationship with Senator Pappas, who chaired the bonding committee. That's one reason we had the St. Louis Park provision in the bonding bill on the Senate side. Got a strong relationship with Senator Rest, who is our tax chair. That's one reason we had the Hopkins TIF bill, our provision, in on the Senate side. This is how you get stuff done. Part of it's the relationships that you can rely on experts and people that you trust.
Question? Yeah, you're up. Hi.
I think you know me, but I am pleased to announce that I am moving, so you will soon be my representatives. My name is Shannon Andreessen, and I will be moving in a week to 532 Fifth Avenue South, so a Hopkins resident. And you all know me because of my work in the LAC for Hopkins, so of course, you're expecting an education question, which I will get to, but I just wanted to quickly reorient around a comment that was made by Senator Latz about gun violence, and you are absolutely correct that the majority is suicide, and white males are the vast majority of those, but Indigenous American Indian Minnesotans experience the highest suicide rates per capita, far exceeding by 70% their white counterparts. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think that's important for us to have in this space about knowing who are victims of gun violence. And just wanted to ask, I know compensatory funding, I think, Cheryl, you know I talk about this every year. I am wondering when you anticipate that will be taken care of for schools, because we are now well past the 2019. So for reference, schools have been getting compensatory aid, which goes to our highest concentration poverty schools, based on numbers for 2019, and as we all know, those are significantly different now. It's 7 years. So just wondering when you think the legislature is going to be able to have a really good, accurate fix in place for us.
Yeah, so first I'm going to say, since we've talked about suicide a few times and we're on public TV, if I know no one's watching right now, but if they do later, 988 is the suicide hotline. So that folks know that. Compensatory aid, as School Board Member Andreessen said, is one of our 14 categoricals in education funding that is concentrated on a programmatic need. We have ones that are concentrated on specific students, like ELL and special education, and then we have ones that are concentrated on a type of district need, like transportation sparsity. But the compensatory aid is programmatic need, and it's meant to focus in on kiddos that need extra help. And when they created that, unlike our average daily membership, which every kid gets a certain amount, same amount across the whole state, which is 80% of what a district gets is that amount on each student. Compensatory, they decided they had to do a formula to kind of figure out, instead of going one-to-one, they created a formula that relied on free and reduced lunch to guess that kids that are in poverty would have more needs when it came to academics. So that was a formula that was created. When the free and reduced lunch forms changed when we did universal meals in 2022, we knew that that might change how those numbers were calculated. We allowed districts to still keep forms, but we did what they call, and I'm almost allergic to this word right now because it didn't work out very well, a hold harmless, where we guessed, okay, so if this many forms go away, we're gonna like bump it up a little bit. We actually doubled the amount of compensatory aid. We went from 440 million that statewide to 880 million. We shouldn't have done that. Because our nonpartisan staff now is looking back at that formula going, yeah, if we would have just left it alone, it would have worked itself out. We have a working group that has been working for a year and a half of very brilliant minds trying to figure out what would be a better formula and how to calculate what compensatory aid is. Is it doing just poverty levels, demographic, regional levels? So their report comes out in October. The last 2 years, we've just put a flat dollar amount in to help keep districts up at the same level they were. So if you look at what a district is at before 2022 and after 2022, it's interesting to see because they went like this and then dropped a little bit, which feels like it's a loss, but it's still more than 2022. So we still have some work to do to try to figure that out. Because I had a co-chair that doesn't believe compensatory aid's important, I couldn't get him to do much until the very end. I talked to our leadership, talk about having to build relationships. I talked to our leadership and was able to get some money through the Senate. Senator Kunish did a good job getting a small package of 27 million in, which would have given districts 70% of what they would have had. Unfortunately, I could only get about 10 million out of our leadership in the end, so we kind of shaved off, gave them a little bit of a cushion, but we're waiting to see what the working group comes up with to try to figure out a new formula on how to calculate that need. So it's hard for districts, especially since we put a specific dollar amount last year, because compensatory is also part of the categorical that we index to inflation, so it's supposed to go up at least by 2% every year, 2% floor, 3% ceiling. But because we put a set dollar amount for a hold harmless, it doesn't get the indexing to inflation. So that goes back on next year, and we should be able to try to figure out what that compensatory looks like. That was a long answer, sorry. I geek out over the education formula. By the way, the average daily membership, we finally, when I became Ed Finance Chair 4 years ago, we were at $6,386 a student. Now we're over $7,300 a student because we indexed it to inflation. It's still not where it should be compared to inflation, but we're getting there. But when you have 20 years of underfunding, 5 of those years was a 0% increase. It's going to take a while to catch up, and we're finally starting to dig out of that hole.
I think we have time for one more question.
I was just, if I may, real quick, and then in response to Shannon's comment about thank you for bringing up the suicide rate among the indigenous population in Minnesota. Absolutely a concern, and I was proud to have funded the missing and murdered indigenous population office in Minnesota. It came through our committee, and I carried the funding for it, and it's absolutely critical. The reason I mention the white males in particular is because in greater Minnesota, in the rural communities, they are the largest voting population base, and if their legislators are reflecting the interests and concerns of the largest voting population base in their rural Minnesota districts, they'd be voting in favor of gun violence reduction measures, and they're not. They're not listening to the needs of their own constituents.
Unless there's another one, you get a second.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everybody else had a chance. So circling back on that AI question, AI consumes human expertise, and it's really hard to train things that do new stuff without new and developing expertise. This means that companies may be in a position in the future where they only want experts for 20% of the time, and then they want a model that performs reliably. But studies show that for those sort of hardest 10% of people's jobs, if they only do that 10%, they actually perform much worse. So let's pretend that I don't know, a doctor. I'm not. And I no longer do 90% of the job that's pretty straightforward. I'm only taking the 10% hardest cases. They've found that when people adopt a model like this, doctors perform, in this metaphor, but I think it may have actually been doctors, perform worse if they're only doing that little section of tricky cases. As a state, and maybe at a larger level, we may start to see a workforce that's unemployed more often and that has a harder time sort of rolling with these punches as business needs start to change much more quickly. Have there been any considerations, any bills, any discussion around possibly changing some structures around unemployment or job programs to help kind of cushion this? Anything like that? Thanks.
You know, not that I'm aware of. We have had, as Larry mentioned, we have had some bills come through about regulating the use of AI and access to AI, the creation of child pornographic images, for example, and age-related access to sites that involve AI and other things that are of concern for children. We've seen that. So we're starting to get into that space an awful lot. I haven't seen, we're going to have a lot of disruption economically in the workforce from this as well, and I'm not sure everyone's quite figured out what it's going to look like. I just heard about a study that disputed the suggestion that AI is going to cause massive workforce layoffs, and it says instead we're probably looking at, I think the number was like a 13 to 20% reduction in workforce as a result of AI, which was a lot less than I had been hearing before then. So who knows? Our economy has a way of figuring out a way around major disruptions and finding new ways to employ people, and maybe this will turn out to be one of those situations.
And part of the things that, when I go to education conferences, the big thing is like, how do we teach our kids how to use the tool of AI, but still use their critical thinking skills and know that it's just a jumping off point to go a little further, kind of like the graphing calculator did. But, all of us of a certain age are thinking like the Terminator. So it's very, and which jobs are going to get affected more. Our youngest is a full stack developer. Like I worry, at least he does front end and back end, and he utilizes AI when he gets stuck. Our oldest she's a doctor, and I understand that analogy very well that you made. That's why she became a family practice doctor, because she wanted to see the whole field, right? So we have to figure out a way to harness this new technology that's out there that's in a more productive way, and also make sure that we're putting parameters around it. Like Representative Elkins, our data nerd, had a bill, and I can't remember, I think it actually a proportion of it passed, saying that when insurance companies are looking at denying claims, that they can't just solely use AI, that a person has to be involved.
Yeah, to that point, the original bill said they can't use AI at all before denying a claim. And the concern was that the insurance companies were just going to have AI look at the claim, deny it, and move on, and not get any human eyeballs on it. But there was some concern that if you said they can't use AI at all, that you're really going to handcuff the doctors that are reviewing this stuff, or the humans that are reviewing this stuff, and not allow them to use a tool that can help as well. So we got to find the right balance where we can use AI as a tool and help society become better and healthier and more fair as a result, without turning everything over to machines.
I guess I'll just say the disruption that can be, even if it's 13 to 20% of people losing jobs, that's huge. So it's I don't think we have the answers yet. I think in some ways this is an area where the technology is out in front of the political side of how we grapple with regulating this for the betterment of all. So it's going to be a big topic.
That's one reason government exists, right, is to try to address some of these issues and at least help people along who need the extra assistance in moving forward. So
Thank you all.
thank you all for being here.
Thank you all for coming.